This week at The Agenda saw the reality of the modern medical system, the risks and rewards of cracking your genetic code, and the limits of Wall Street accountability. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with a visit to the doctor and the president of the Ontario Medical Association, Doug Weir. Annual checkups will soon become a distant memory for many Ontarians. The province's physicians are moving towards, quote, personalized health reviews, with limited examination and more discussion. And joining us now for more on the changes, Dr. Doug Weir. He's president of the Ontario Medical Association. And as I welcome you back to TVO, it's nice to see you again. We want to let everybody know that we want you to be part of this conversation. Producer Daniel Kitts is hosting a Twitter chat right now, so let us know your thoughts on moving away from annual physicals and whether you think patients in Ontario are overtreated or undertreated. And you can use the hashtag on Twitter, AgendaTVO. Okay, let's get into this. Docs across Ontario are telling their patients now, I gather, that they no longer need to come in for the annual physical exam. How come this is happening?
Well, as you may recall, we were in negotiations with the government in the fall, and part of that was when we came to the table, we wanted to make the healthcare system more efficient, and we brought in a number of ideas that we thought would do that. And one of them was to replace the annual physical with a personalized health review. The personalized health review is still an annual visit. It's for people between the ages of 18 and 64. For people on younger and older, nothing's changed. For people who have chronic illnesses, nothing's changed. But the evidence really shows that for healthy people in that age range, they don't need a full physical. And we've sort of known that for a long time, and there's an ever-growing accumulation of evidence around that. So we want to put that evidence into practice. And so what we want people to come in is we want them to come in still to see their doctor, but it'll be focused on what would be appropriate for that age and stage of their life. So for example, a young girl who comes in her early 20s, you're going to ask them a different set of questions that's going to have to do with lifestyle, what they're doing at that stage in their life. A 55-year-old woman who comes in, it's going to be about are they perimenopausal, and other kinds of questions about health risks that they might have.
If we've known for a long time that the annual health review or annual checkup as we knew it wasn't all that effective or helpful, how come we still did them?
Well, you know, I think doctors have been doing them for 100 years, and I think there's a certain kind of reassurance that patients have had by going in, and I think they think that by having that they're going to somehow be better off. I'm not sure that's the case, and I think that certainly is what the evidence is, that it's not the case. In fact, outcomes from the research show that whether you have an annual physical or not, it's roughly the same outcome. So but I think people still like the idea of going in, and so what we're really doing is changing it so that you still will see your physician, still get the kinds of evidence-based investigations that need to be done. For example, Pap smears for women every 3 years, having your blood pressure checked. But it's not going to be this head-to-toe physical exam that really isn't useful. And I think, you know, change is always slow.
Let me just get a little greater clarity around how it's going to be different. I think right now you go in, they're going to take some blood, they're going to check your reflexes, check your blood pressure, check your heart rate, you know, how tall are you, how much do you know, everybody knows all of that stuff. What won't happen now going forward?
The biggest change is you're not going to get that head-to-toe physical exam. They're not going to necessarily check your reflexes unless there's some reason to think that you have a problem. They're not going to examine every sort of part of your body, and they're not going to do the same kind of extensive review of everything. What they are going to do is they're going to focus on the kinds of questions and counseling that would be appropriate for the kinds of risks that you'd be at if you were a smoker, for example, focusing on that, asking people about their drinking habits, their exercise, their diet, those kind of things.
I assume that the new personalized health review will cost the healthcare system less than the former.
That's right. The big change really is that physicians will get paid, instead of getting paid roughly $77, they're going to get paid $50. So that's where the savings come in. The hope is that because it's going to take less time, that physicians will have the time then to see more patients who are coming in with symptoms, so that it'll improve access for patients overall.
Let's just start where Dr. Weir and I finished up, which is to talk about this annual checkup that is now going away. You've done these in the past, right?
I've done a lot of them.
You've done a lot of them.
Yeah.
Are they valuable?
It appears not.
But when you did them, did you think they were?
No, and you know, we've actually known this for quite a long time, that there's no evidence to support the notion of an annual health examination. And Ontario is late to the game. There are many other provinces that haven't funded an annual health exam for quite some time. There is, of course, evidence to support certain maneuvers that we often do in an annual health exam. So, for example, you know, I did one this morning before I came here, and I always make a point of making sure a person's immunizations are up to date. Well, you know, making sure everyone's got a tetanus shot every 10 years or as their flu shot, that's an evidence-based thing. The pap smear or the mammogram or the discussion about vitamin D or exercise or smoking cessation, you know, certain interventions that we often do as part of an annual health exam have great evidence to support them. But the idea of bringing you in once a year when you feel perfectly well and looking in your ears and looking in your throat and listening to your chest when you feel absolutely fine is not an evidence-based way to spend our time, and therefore not an evidence-based way to spend our money. And I think that that's a really important part of this discussion.
From a health policy analysis type of look at it, where are you on this?
Oh, I welcome it, because really we're moving towards measuring what's appropriate. Trying to individualize care so that patients get what they need rather than subjecting them to many, many maneuvers that are inappropriate, wasteful of money, and potentially exposing them to undue risks.
Sholem Globerman, you're here representing the patients. What do the patients think about losing that annual?
Well, one of the things that they talk about in doing this is to actually talk to the patient for a while. Right? So some of the time we used in developing a relationship with the doctor, which is something that I think is very important. I think that patients developing better relations with doctors is I think, a big part of this. So we're very much in favor of this as well.
Really? Because I would have thought that... Listen, I don't know, I haven't done a survey on this, but my hunch is there are patients out there who like what they think is the emotional security that comes with knowing that there's going to be an annual exam that will be checking a whole bunch of stuff, even if it's not all that helpful.
Well, but it's not checking just all that stuff. It's actually developing a relationship with the doctor. The doctor, if the doctor can in fact personalize the interview and personalize the examination so that it fits the patient and the needs of the patient at that time, that would be much better than having a check like a car would have.
So you can actually do more and better with less.
I think so. I think that having that spending time with someone and getting to know them a little bit and getting to know what their lives are like and where they are with things is really very important for the doctor and for the patient. And in fact will allow the doctor to see things that might be wrong with the patient that are not done by instrumental methods.
Dr. Martin, can I go back at you on this one more time here? Because I want to know if in your experience you picked up more things that were of concern to a patient in terms of their health through that annual exam, or did you find more false positives and create more stress, and therefore in the final analysis it wasn't worth it at the end of the day?
Well, of course the answer is both, right? And that is one of the things that makes it really tricky, is that everyone has a story of someone they knew who had something picked up on a routine visit that might not have been picked up for some time had it not been for that routine visit. But on a population level, it's not a good idea. That's not how you run a healthcare system, right? You need to look at what there is an evidence-based support doing for everyone all the time. And so I would, as Sholem says, I would much rather spend my time rather than doing a whole bunch of stuff that I know is unlikely to be useful for someone, talking to the person and determining what is it that's going on in their life right now, or what is it about their family history, or what is it about their personal history that puts them at risk, and working around that more personalized view than feeling that there's a checklist of things that I need to get done in order to be able to say I've done an annual health examination.
But you're thinking, Carol, if I can put it this way, in a broad systemic way over a whole $47, $48 billion healthcare system. The patient doesn't think of it that way. The patient thinks of it as my one-on-one interaction with my doctor.
That's right, and they're still going to get that. There's still an expectation that patients will meet with their doctors once a year and discuss an individualized plan for investigation of symptoms or signs, or of treatments, a review of their medications. There are many, many useful things that could be done in the context of that annual visit, including the doctor's reassurance that subjecting them to a whole battery of tests was really not very useful for them.
Doug Weir, medical testing can be bad for your health?
It can be, and I think just I want to pick up on a point is I think there's going to be a change, right? So some people who've been having physical exams every year for the last 30 years, when they come in this time and they say, we're not going to do that, we're going to have to explain to them why we're doing things differently, and we have to explain to them the fact that there's risk and benefits to this. So sometimes doing a test leads to more tests, and those more tests have their own risks associated with it. And I think we're going to have to explain that to patients so that patients understand the rationale behind what we're doing, and that at the end of the day, this is going to be better for them.
The DNA Dilemma. That was your series, which is still up on the Globe's website, and it's very good work. You asked people whether they would have their genome sequenced and whether they would share their genetic information with the public. And here's the results. 80% said they would sequence their genome, and 70% said the benefits to science and research would outweigh, I guess, some of the risks that we're talking about here. And Carolyn, after it's all said and done, what do you infer from those numbers and perhaps some of the other public opinion you learned?
Well, I have to say I was surprised. I was surprised that the overwhelming majority of people who responded said they would jump in and they would do this, that they thought that the risks would be worth it if they could contribute in this way. But a theme that keeps coming up about consent and what people want to know is, I think, there's a real conflict, I think, going on with genomics and sort of this sense of who should be the gatekeepers of information. It's happening everywhere in all mass media, and I think it's happening very much so in science now as well, where it used to be, you know, the doctor would tell you what he thought you ought to know or she thought you ought to know about a particular test result and wouldn't give you an answer if the answer was fuzzy or they couldn't explain it well themselves. And I think focus groups, from what I understand, are now coming back specifically on the question of genetics, and people are saying, we understand that you don't know. We understand that this is ambiguous. We just want to know, and we want to be able to decide for ourselves whether or what we do with this incomplete, fuzzy information. And I think one of the interesting aspects of the consent form for the Personal Genome Project is it does say this, that what you might learn here is incomplete, and what you might learn here could actually turn out to be true one day, but not true the next. And it's all very much a moving target. And do you want to jump into that kind of ambiguity? And where maybe the old gatekeepers would say, no, we shouldn't, you know, parse that out. That should be, you know, kept from. People are saying, no, let us in. Let us in as the knowledge evolves.
I want to see how far you folks want to be let into this. You are all people who deal with this. Okay, so let's go around the table here. Bev, would you want your genome sequenced, and would you want to know?
Not right now.
You don't want to know?
Well, I would like to know in time when we have protection in Canada. And to the point, I think a lot of people are willing to jump in, but I'm not sure that they understand the full risk of it. 91%, this was a poll done by the federal government, 91% of the people feel that genome information should be used for research and health, but not for business decisions. So insurance decisions and employment decisions. So truly public opinion is much different than what can actually happen and what people are putting forward. I'm not sure people truly understand. I think people think that they cannot be discriminated against. So it's very low on the totem pole.
So you're a no for now. Stephen?
Well, mine's done already, but what I want to point out is mine's not on the internet yet.
Would you object if it were?
Well, I'm still thinking about it. It's not. I haven't had time to do it, to be honest. But again, this is part of the role of having this project is to figure this out. But what I wanted to say is just to make it really clear that when we're doing these genetic experiments in the testing and things in the hospitals, that's not put on the internet. I mean, this is protected information. So we really have to.
That from
so just to make that really clear.
Did you learn anything from your readout?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've found that I've inherited some very interesting genetic variants that were quite surprising. That you know, I found some large deletions of segments of my DNA that we all have. When we look at any of your DNA, you'll find these things, these copy number variants that our laboratory helped discover in 2004. But I found, in particular, one segment of my DNA that is missing a big chunk of a lot of genes, and that was kind of surprising to me.
What does that mean, though?
It means that I'm a mutant like everyone else in the population. And in fact, this is really, I think the beauty of the study of genetics is that it shows us we all have genetic alterations and mutations and variations depending on the terminology used. We're not perfect, but it's what makes us who we are. And that's what we're trying to really understand. What information is most relevant to making medical decisions for families who have very specific questions of what's going to impact them in the future.
Laura, let's go to you in New York. Would you want to have your genome sequenced if you haven't done it already?
I haven't done it already. I've sort of one of these lesser scans, but I haven't done the full sequence. I would be perfectly happy to, because I think it would be a good thing. In that spirit of I'd like to contribute, and really, we can't make use of the data without lots and lots of information on healthy people. If we only get information on sick people, we're going to have a bias in terms of what we find out.
Carrie?
I wouldn't. And that's a personal decision. I mean, I certainly understand what Laura's saying, and I agree. I mean, from a point of view of altruism, we need large amounts of information, and not just genomic mapping, we need personal information about disease profiles and health and well-being. I mean, that's how epidemiology, study of health and illness in society, work. But it's the uncertainty. I don't worry so much about insurance and this and that. I would worry more about the ambiguity of just not being able to make sense of what it is saying. There might be a tendency here. We see it in the genotype. We don't know if that would affect you in your day-to-day life. And these are early days, but I'm not convinced anything is more personal, actually, than your DNA and your genome. If there's something more personal than that, I can't think of what it is.
Do you think there's some argument that could come along in the next year or two that might make you persuadable the other way?
Yes. I do. Maybe not year or two. I think
longer down the road.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what that argument might be?
Well, I mean, if I was to hear more about the incredible social contribution that it's making, I would be persuaded. But I must say, this is not the biggest ethical problem within society, is understanding our genome. If you want to look at the world's greatest ethical challenges, they're mostly access to health care and well-being, which we're very much not interested in. So, it's not as if this is the way to make the world a better place. It's one of the ways, but it's probably not the most pressing. I feel technology is pushing us into this, and I work on the front lines, and I feel very pushed by this. And barely ready.
Because the technology is moving faster than our ability to understand
Then I'm able to deal with.
Then you're able to deal with it.
Yeah, to speak selfishly, yeah.
Okay. Carolyn, well, we know you did.
Oh, yes, but there's a caveat.
What's the caveat?
I looked at my genes and my family's genome to look back. And I was very deliberate in not looking at the genome to look forward. It was a condition of my mother's participation in my project, was that we not find out about future health risks. She was, happy to look at our DNA to tell us something about our ancestry. But, and I understand that, and I'm actually thinking through right now, would I do this? Would I join PGP? Because I know my personality, and I err on the side of worrying, and peace of mind is a valuable thing to me.
But you're a medical reporter, and you can imagine the contribution that information might make.
So how about, if I contributed, but you don't tell me what you can have my DNA, but I don't want to know what it says. Yeah, I could see something like that.
Really?
Unless there was something medically actionable. Otherwise, I think I would err on the side of contributing, but not being. I just can't see, annotating myself and finding out, and the uncertainty of what something may or may not mean.
Can I just hit this on the head? You don't want to know because you're afraid you might find out you're going to have something that is untreatable, and what's the point? Is that it?
I think so. I think that's part of it, and I think it also then would make me worry for my kids, and I would worry if I have this quirk or blip that may result in an adverse health event, that do my children have it? And there are some people who really want to know all of that kind of information, and I don't know that I'm that kind of person.
You spent some time for your book in the Ottawa Hospital, and you saw what came through the door. What kind of patients did you see?
Well, first of all, it, like many other big city hospitals, is an acute care hospital, and it's also a teaching hospital. And our system, put it this way, is a triangle, at the top of which are acute care facilities for acute care patients. That's heart attacks. You and I have get in a car accident, people who have deeply chronic and serious diseases. And the system actually works quite well for those people. Fortunately for society, that's only a minority of the people, but nevertheless it works well. The system gets weaker the further away from the acute care you get, because the wait times get unacceptably long. We have the longest wait times, according to these studies I was citing, in the world. So the accessing the system becomes much more difficult when you move down the chain. So what I saw in the acute care hospital was, on the one hand, extremely talented, dedicated, and trained professionals, nurses, doctors, other staff, and even hated administrators. And so I was reassured that at the top of the food chain, things are good. The problem was this acute care hospital was being asked to do a whole bunch of things that acute care hospitals shouldn't have to do, namely that you go, as I did, and spend a day in the emergency, and see, we've known about this for years, and you ask patients, why are you here? They're not on crutches, they're not coming in ambulances. They're people with colds and cuts and stuff like that. They should be in a family clinic. You say, why are you here? Don't have a family doctor. Family clinic was closed. Feel safer in the hospital because this is a full service hospital if something goes wrong. Then at the other end, they have a monitor on the screen so you can track this every day. 13% of the patients every hour of every day are the frail elderly who should not be there. But they're there because there's no long-term care, there's not enough nursing care, and they're too frail to go home. Everybody talks about home care, which is a very important thing to have more of in our system, but a lot of these people had dementia, they had a chronic series of conditions. Their family was kind of at the end of their tether. They really couldn't go home, but there was no facilities. So they're lying at a $1,300 a day bed instead of at a nursing home, which would have been $300 or $400. And then spend a day in the operating rooms, bowled over by the skill of the surgeons. But there's 100 rooms there. 4 of them are open 24/7 for emergencies. The other 96 open at 8 and close at 4. 5 days a week, not 7, 5. So 2/3 roughly of the operating room time available in a 24/7 week, there are no patients and the rooms are closed. And you kind of look at that and say, wait a minute, there's all this unmet demand, witness to which are wait times for non-acute surgeries, and over here is all this unused supply. What is that?
So why aren't they getting together?
Because we can't price any surgeries in our system, and because the hospitals were given global budgets and they had to fit people into it. Now, to be fair, in Ontario, they're changing the formula whereby hospitals will be rewarded for processing more patients. This is a system that was introduced in other countries years ago. We're now catching up. It's a better formula. It's going to lower the wait times, although the cost might go up because you're doing more surgeries. But the one thing that struck me is, what are hip and knee replacements being done in a hospital, fighting for OR space with neurosurgery and other complicated surgery? They should be in a clinic over here, run privately by the orthopods, who would organize the clinic. The access would be fast. The quality would be as good. The state would pay. The state would pay. It's a private delivery of a publicly paid service. And what's this system for? Is it for ideology or is it for patients? I say it's for patients, and I'm agnostic, frankly, on a lot of the points for which others take a deep ideological view.
Is the state agnostic on this kind of thing?
No, the state is, generally speaking, very hot. Well, it depends on the province, in fairness. But in this province, traditionally, the governments have been extremely hostile to what I just said. Now, other countries have moved to that model, and I'm not preaching for that as the solution to all the problems, but I'm not discarding it either. The problem is that all kinds of interests and ideologues have said this is against the spirit and the law. And the law is the Canada Health Act, or one law, and it clearly says the system should be publicly administered. It doesn't say publicly delivered. And in fact, the civil servants who wrote a manual talking about what each clause meant, which I was able to get a copy of, specifically say that private medicine is allowed under a publicly administered program. And Monique Bégin, who's the author of the Canada Health Act, I spent hours with her, and she would agree with, I believe, everything I've just said. But this has been, for political reasons, I think, more than anything else, or ideological reasons, construed as meaning that everything has to be delivered by the state, by public employees, and anything delivered privately is against the principles and the law, and both of those affirmations are incorrect.
Okay, let me state the obvious here. We do not have anybody from the Ontario Hospital Association, the Ontario Nurses Association, the Ontario Medical Association. Well, I decided let's not go with the typical stakeholders who will defend their turf and all of that kind of stuff here. We wanted to go with 3 wise and witty observers, and so we've gone a different route here. But let me put this to you. Do unions have a case, Mike, when they say you can't put those procedures that we've been talking about into private settings because you can't control quality and you can't control price, and at the end of the day, you can't be sure that the employees are going to be the best ones possible?
No, that's absolutely false. I think there's plenty of models out there, as small as they are in Canada. Shouldice is a private hospital that has a quality agenda that's second to none in terms of their outcomes. I think sizing and scoping for surgical centers to be standalone facilities where they do nothing but a single surgery or just a few is incredibly efficient. It's a known fact that the outcomes are much better if you have doctors doing just 1 or 2 procedures and the nurses doing 1 or 2 procedures. It's incredibly efficient. They can get more done. And obviously we have a regulator in Ontario to ensure that the quality and the safety aspect of these facilities are appropriate and protective of the citizens that go and get these procedures done in these facilities. And frankly, we need to see more of this because it is more efficient. And partially because I believe the public system needs a comparator. I think they need to be shown that there's competition in town now, that in fact they need to pull their socks up to do a better job, and what better way of doing it than demonstrating that there's other ways of doing it, as long as the public don't have to pay out of pocket or jump the queue. I think it's the wave of the future.
Carolyn, what's your view on that?
Well, let me put this into perspective a little bit. Sure, there are things that can be done in specialized clinics outside hospitals. We see it, we've seen it in Canada, we see it in other advanced countries. Expecting too much from that particular route would be a mistake. Britain has experimented with so-called independent sector treatment centers. They thought, this was introduced under a Labour government, under Tony Blair. They expected within about 4 years, 15% of elective surgery would be done in those clinics. It was about 3%. Now, you know, the current reforms are pushing it harder, but there is a limit. That the expenses in our system are not driven by hips and knees and cataracts. I mean, those, if we can reduce those costs, sure, we will reduce health costs overall. But really, really sick people drive the health costs in our system. And specialized clinics are not the answer for treating really, really sick people.
Really sick people, correct. Meaning somebody who's 85
yeah, I mean,
in bed
30% roughly of the costs are driven by 1 or 2% of the patients.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you asked me, here's $1, Jeff Simpson, spend it to improve the healthcare system, I'd never put it in the healthcare system. I'd put it into reducing poverty. Because poor people access the system because their health is worse, and therefore they put more of a strain on the system by far than people who are affluent. Now, that discussion about income inequality is a much more complicated discussion to have, and it's very long term. And the problem, if you're an elected official, is the public wants, you mentioned earlier in our discussion, you quoted me saying contradictory. The public wants more now, but they don't want to pay any more now in either taxes or certainly not user fees. So that's what I mean by contradictory. So the political person who hears the good sense of what I think we would all agree is the right thing to do in terms of reducing the long-term costs on the healthcare system is to get more people out of poverty, says that's all fine, that's great, we're a terrific objective, except that I got an election here in 4 years' time. And I need to show results, and results are more services, more this, more that, and so on and so forth, because that's what my constituents want.
5 years later, not a single Wall Street player responsible for his or her role in the global financial collapse has been successfully prosecuted. And our next guest might know why. In Sacramento, California, here's Phil Angelides, the former chair of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. And Mr. Angelides, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. How are you doing out there on the left coast?
I'm doing wonderfully, and it's good to be with you.
Thank you. We are going to discuss the investigation and the causes into the 2008 financial crisis, but I thought we would start with the latest news out of the U.S. Justice Department and their intent to file civil charges against the Standard & Poor's rating agency for their alleged wrongdoing in the subprime mortgage crisis. Let's start with that. What is the case against the ratings agency as you understand it?
Well, as I understand it, the case against the rating agencies is they essentially participated in fraud. The major rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, rated tens of thousands of mortgage securities as AAA, when in fact they were highly defective. And what we found in our investigation at the Commission was that the rating agencies were driven by the drive for profit, the drive for market share, and a victim of that appetite for revenue growth was that their analysis, the models, the very analysis that investors depended on for a fair look at these securities was sacrificed. And so at the heart of this is what our commission found was that the rating agencies were essential cogs in the wheel of financial destruction. The subprime disaster, the bubble and subsequent collapse could not have happened but for their participation.
Their argument, or at least part of their argument as I understand it, was that they were merely exercising free speech rights. They were putting, in their view, information out there that is protected by the First Amendment of your Constitution, and therefore, that's okay. How does that argument stack up in your view?
I think it's a pathetic argument because they were paid extraordinarily large amounts of money to produce a product. And the product was supposed to fairly evaluate the nature of the securities that investors all over the world were buying. And on that count, they failed miserably. And what was very clear from our investigation is internally within those organizations, people were speaking about the flaws in the rating process, about how the fact that they had really become a AAA rating factory, and that the analysis that investors depended on was being sacrificed for profit and market share. So it really doesn't stack up. It's a tragic defense in many respects.
I have read some of the emails that the Department of Justice has made public that are internal to Standard & Poor's, and some of them read the likes of which are, this economy is a spinning top, and when this top stops spinning, the economy is going to fall off a cliff. But S&P's defense on this is that the department cherry-picked these emails, and that in fact, if you look at all of them across a broader range, in fact, it doesn't look that bad, and their behavior is defensible. Again, do you have a view on that?
Well, I do, because this wasn't a one-off problem with these agencies. Keep this in mind. Take Moody's, for example. And the conduct of Moody's and Standard & Poor's was very much alike. These rating agencies rated about 40,000 mortgage securities as AAA from about 2000 to 2007. Now, take into account that maybe there's a handful of U.S. corporations with a AAA rating. Take into account that there's maybe a dozen states in the United States with a AAA rating. In 2006 alone, they rated more than 9,000. That's 30 per working day. They were stamping these things as AAA. And close to 90% of those that were rated AAA in 2006 were downgraded. So they were not even close. They were dramatically off the mark. And what we found was, again, emails, testimony from employees that testified to the fact that the critical analysis that investors relied on was mowed under by a corporate structure that was in a quest for profits, for market share, for revenue growth.
Mr. Angelides, just one more question. We all know of this expression since the Great Recession, too big to fail. I wonder if experience is teaching us now that there are some executives on Wall Street that are too big to jail.
I hope not. It would be a travesty for the American system of justice if that was the case. And it would also, I think, send a very bad signal that this kind of behavior, this kind of pervasive misconduct will be tolerated, and therefore it will happen again. As I look back at the crisis, there's a couple of things that really strike me. This was not an instance of a few bad apples. It was pervasive misconduct. In the area of mortgage fraud, while most of the prosecutions have gone against little people, keep in mind that there were millions of loans that were shoved across the country by these companies, clearly fraudulent loans. We found in our commission's work that between 2005 and 2007, there was about $1 trillion worth of clearly fraudulent loans made. The FBI warned about an epidemic of mortgage fraud in 2004 and again in 2005. The number of suspicious activity reports of potential criminal financial fraud activity doubled between 1996 and 2005 in the mortgage area, and then doubled again by 2007. This was big and large. The regulators and law enforcement turned a blind eye to it. And now to not pursue this kind of systemic wrongdoing, I think, would be particularly damaging. And I think I'd make one final point. If you read the business pages today, you know, you see words like price fixing and bid rigging and securities fraud and money laundering. You'd think it would be about the mob, but it's about the financial industry. And I don't know that they've learned the lesson of the financial crisis, because they didn't pay a price for it. They were bailed out. They were supported. There was no legal, political, or economic price paid. So I think for the good of the country, the integrity of our financial system, the American people have to feel that justice has been done. That doesn't mean hangman justice, but it means thorough investigation and pursuit of cases where there's real consequence for misconduct.
That's Phil Angelides, the chair of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. We thank you so much for joining us on TVO tonight.
My pleasure.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website. That's theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.